This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Hello and welcome to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. My name is Kiri Masters and I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a cold today, but I know that the guest that I've brought on for today's episode is going to he really carries his own weight, and that is Scott Kilmartin, a retail advisor and e-commerce architect in Australia. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
I can't believe it's been 2 years, and it's probably been almost exactly 2 years since we were talking about the Amazon launch.
Yes, it has. You've got a good memory, and it's a perfect time to be revisiting Amazon Australia since it's been 2 years, and we spoke 2 years ago. When we spoke last, you came out with an entire web docu-series about Amazon in Australia. How did all that go? I don't think I followed up with you about that.
Yeah, we ran about half a dozen episodes of it, and it ended up, I guess, fizzled is probably the right word, because Amazon didn't quite have the impact that we were all expecting. I guess that's some of the things we'll talk about today. The later it got towards their launch, it seemed less and less likely like they were going to stampede in Australia, but they still managed to get open before Christmas, and I was like, well, it's probably going to be, they're probably a lot more organised than we think. But as it's turned out, probably Amazon, I think people really lost interest in Amazon once we got through the Christmas period, and it petered out a little bit, which is somewhat indicative of kind of Amazon's experience in Australia.
Yes, that's a great allegory, although I'm sad to hear that your docu-series fell victim to the fizzle that was Amazon Australia.
There was so much media just on that. I mean, I can't remember. There was 6 months of media in Australia like I hadn't seen before. It was like, the Beatles touring, or there was that anticipation that there was 3 stories a day, every type of media was covering it. And then it didn't really happen. And then, of course, as is media's want, they kind of turn the stories around going, Amazon is a dud in Australia. So they got the other end of the story going as well. But it's definitely got more digital column inches than impact in Australia.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I saw most of that from afar, being over the other side of the Pacific. But yeah, initially there was a lot of backlash from the traditional brick and mortar retailers in Australia, the established department stores particularly, saying this is going to kill us and we need regulatory intervention, and who do they think they are? And then as soon as it didn't look like they were going to take as much of a bite out of their business, it was, well, look at us, a lot more swagger and this sense of invincibility now, it seems.
Yeah, that's a really good read on it. I'd suggest that was the case, but there was definitely fear in the boardrooms for the 6 months to a year. Once word spread that they were absolutely looking for warehousing, then there was a lot of people that were really concerned. But a lot of chest thumping afterwards when it didn't play out the way that was feared and expected.
So for everyone that hasn't been following along as closely as us, what happened when Amazon first launched was there was no FBA or Prime program in Australia for a good 8 months, and then they finally opened a warehouse in Sydney and then another one in Melbourne eventually. But it's just been a very slow rollout of features. There was no advertising capability until quite recently. My feeling when I went to amazon.com.au was it was just kind of like a ghost town. There were no promotions, there was no Amazon-led content, there was no brand-led content, no one was putting in any time or effort into their product listings, there were no ads. It just felt very, very different to a Amazon.com site where there is, by comparison, a lot going on and a lot more to hold your interest.
it definitely had the skeletal feel, and I think partly the limited amount of products, as well as the way that those products were displayed and the extra content that people are used to seeing on Amazon.com, then that caused a lot of pushback going, we've been served a second-rate product. If you remember, part of the strategy to really push traffic to Amazon.com.au was to turn off access to Amazon.com for Australia. I think might have even been Australia and New Zealand buyers. There was a fairly significant backlash against that, and a couple of months later they turned it back on, so you could buy locally or you could buy from the mothership. But I think that was unusual for Amazon to turn around and go and do that. But I think it really signified that, I'm not sure they botched the launch, but the launch definitely didn't go as planned. There were lots of kind of PR spins in the media saying that, it's been our most successful launch. They plucked some numbers out around traffic, but I think by any reasonable metric in terms of products on offer and sales numbers, and I'm talking to clients, and I've got a lot of industry friends who were either selling on Amazon or selling on other marketplaces. There was no one that was breaking sales records out of the gate or even doing significant volume. So I know for the clients that I've spoken to, it was part of their sales channel mix, but we're talking kind of less than 5% was even the most positive feedback I was getting.
Yes, and that's definitely been our experience at BOBSLED with the few brave clients that we've had who've launched in Australia and maintained it for a decent amount of time to see results. Is it's really about a 5% incremental revenue upgrade from what you see on the .com site, and that's with quite decent investment in making those products Prime eligible and developing, pushing out the content and announcing it to your newsletter. Like, that's not just passive 5% lift. That's with some effort and getting an agency involved with doing that. So it's not been a terribly exciting new market for folks to venture into.
One of the anecdotal signs is, Amazon is not a word that's just often used in dinner party or barbecue conversation here in the way it's used in the US. It has nowhere near the impact on the vocabulary, and whilst that's purely anecdotal, I think that's a really good sign of kind of where Amazon sits. The interesting thing that's come from Amazon's launch is lots of other businesses in Australia have launched marketplaces, some with no success. A couple of the department stores in Australia, Myer being like a Bloomingdale's type company that's struggled for the last decade. They rushed out a Myer marketplace. It wasn't particularly appealing for merchants. The fees were quite high. That was quietly shuttered not long ago.
What was the fee structure? Do you have any specifics on that?
I can't recall, but I can't recall the actual numbers, but I think as a merchant you're paying almost double or right around double the fees that you would be to Amazon, eBay, or one of the other marketplaces in Australia, which is Catch of the Day, which is a smaller independent one, or at that stage was an independent. So one of the things that's happened in the marketplace business in Australia is there's a big parent company called Wesfarmers, and they have the dominant hardware tools and kind of a tools and gardening department store in Australia called Bunnings. They also have the Kmart brand and the Target brand in Australia. Now, Target in Australia is a little bit different to Target in the US, but it has a bunch of similarities. What Wesfarmers have done,
and also Woolworths, right?
Correct. Yeah. So so they are literally the dominant retailer overall in Australia. So they've made two significant moves in the last year. They have put Bunnings, which did not sell online, had to put a catalogue online, and now they do full-scale e-commerce. They also acquired Catch, which used to be called Catch of the Day, which were probably the number 3 marketplace in Australia, behind eBay, which was and is still the most dominant marketplace. What they've done with Catch is they have put together a kind of a hybrid marketplace where if you're a member of Catch, which is $6.50 a month, I think Amazon's Prime membership is $6.90 a month, then for orders over $45, you get free delivery. And what they're effectively doing is basically crisscrossing between Bunnings and Catch, which are two company-owned brands, almost commingling databases in the way that YouTubers get other popular YouTubers on their channel. It's a kind of an introductory play. But they have gone from being a business or brands that were e-commerce was at best an afterthought to now really diving deep into it, which further, because of their dominance in terms of physical retail, that's a fairly appealing offering. Now, it doesn't have all the things. It doesn't have the Amazon video and access to books, so it's purely a logistics play, but it signifies their seriousness going from zero to hitting the accelerator pretty hard in the last 2 years.
That is very interesting, actually. So the Amazon, although it was in and of itself fairly underwhelming over the past 2 years, it has acted as a catalyst to drag these legacy retailers into the 21st century and literally put their catalog online. That is one good thing that's come out of it.
I think if you went to some of these companies 5 years ago, that they wouldn't know what the word marketplace meant, and now they're absolutely across it. And they may not have absolute defensive and offensive strategies that are around it as yet, but they are rolling out and they're trying different tactics.
Yeah.
So that Amazon's launch has brought marketplaces kind of into vogue in Australia.
Yeah.
It's almost become fashionable.
Well, it has had there's been in the States as well some recent news of companies turning into marketplaces as well. So one recent news item was from Brooklinen, I believe.
I saw that.
And they started, and it's a very strange, not quite a marketplace model where it's very unclear who is going to handle returns and refunds. They're going to ship all the merchandise in Brooklinen branded boxes. They're doing the fulfillment themselves, but very unclear who handles returns and how that actually works. But that's one. And then
I looked at that and I've gone, are they all coming out of separate warehouses, which means separate box, which means someone's eating some part of the shipping fee? Yeah. It was a little bit unclear, wasn't it?
Yes.
Now the holiday selling season is officially here and it's time to ramp up sales. But how are you going to fund that extra marketing spend, that extra inventory, hiring extra help? One way to do that and access easy capital is through Payoneer Capital Advance. From a company I have used personally and have trusted with my international payments for the last 4 years. Payoneer's Capital Advance product is the ideal cash flow management solution for e-commerce merchants on Amazon and Walmart. What they do is extend a credit offer to you based on your store's recent sales, which you pay back gradually over time until the offer is fully settled. There's no credit checks, no collateral, and they're offering a really good rate as well. Go to paynr.co/Braintrust to learn more.
So I think that the marketplace model is getting more attention, not just in Australia, but elsewhere as well. So let's also talk about eBay, which I had an interview last week with a guest who was an ex-eBayer, and we started off the call him saying how much more successful Amazon was than eBay, as commonly held wisdom. And I said, well, there's still one market where eBay holds the crown, and that's Australia. And they have that crown by a pretty long margin as well. And they're doing very innovative things in Australia. So tell us a little bit about what eBay's doing to retain their position here.
So eBay, you could not unfairly say hibernated, was asleep at the wheel, and really, it wasn't broke, don't fix it for the best part of 15 years since they opened in the end of the 90s in Australia. And then with talk of Amazon coming, they finally woke up, and eBay has been it's been the poster child strong market for eBay globally. And so they, become much more aggressive around promoting sellers, They went out and tried to get a whole bunch of brands that were successful fashion retailers, homewares retailers, and a bunch of others in various categories, put them front and center of their site and really promoted that it's not a garage sale business, that there's lots more buy now, less auction, and a lot more new products being sold. The other big thing that is a direct follow on from Amazon is they have rolled out their version of a 3PL. It's not quite FBA, but eBay have partnered with Australia Post and a couple of other third parties to allow sellers the option of warehousing and pick and pack, which was the really tricky part of growing a business on eBay. At some point, you had to invest in.
Wow. So like an FBA equivalent.
Well, it's not an FBA equivalent, but it's definitely following that lead. And
Right.
and I know half a dozen clients that are using it and using it really well, that dip their toe in the water initially, set a limited amount of product to the warehousing, but are really rolling it out now on a big scale with a view to potentially moving all of their warehousing into that umbrella. And so that's been, again, direct impact on Amazon coming to the market. And we're also seeing some freight companies in Australia. There's a big one here called Linfox, which are, let's call them for the sake of it, an independent version of a FedEx, but mainly a trucking company that was distributing pallets around the country. They are opening up warehousing and pick and pack options for independent sellers. And you would say that would be a direct impact on what Amazon has brought to the market in terms of awareness of the need for pick and pack and how these sellers can scale their businesses. The other interesting thing that's, I guess, different in Australia than it is in a lot of other markets, but I think it's going to grow, is the buy now, pay later phenomenon. So there's a company, it's an Australian company called Afterpay. They're only a few years old, and they have gone from being another version of what was an online lay-by concept to getting a bunch of investment and really aggressively marketing and signing up sellers, both online retailers and offline retailers as well. And so Afterpay has I think in 2017, it was equated, there were some numbers around, there were $2 billion in sales that came through the buy now, pay later market. And Afterpay were the dominant player. In 2019, that shot up to being a projection of $8 billion through Christmas this year. So
As a percentage of gross.
yeah, and that's the stuff that they're a little bit vague on. Afterpay look like they are heading towards an IPO, and so they're not releasing. They're releasing the odd stat at this point in time, so it's really hard to get an idea of what percentage of overall retail sales they account for. So the impact that they've had is Amazon in Australia, Amazon.com.au, have signed a deal with their competitor, which is a smaller company called ZipPay, to offer buy now, pay later on Amazon. And as far as I'm aware, and you'd know more about this, Kiri, I don't think any of the other Amazon platforms around the world offer buy now, pay later in through a third party.
I think that you might be right, because Amazon Pay is a payment processor of its own right. But yeah, this is really fascinating, because Afterpay, you mentioned the other one that was technically ahead of them, but they really came out with at least a really strong PR push, and they became really big really fast. And then in the States, I think that the more dominant player is Klarna, who I believe is Swedish. And then the fact that Amazon chose this, like a small upstart that's neither the most popular player in other marketplaces, nor Amazon's own native payments product, nor Afterpay, is a very strange move.
It's odd. I would wonder, why wouldn't Amazon roll out their own version of it? It doesn't make any sense. But one of the things that Afterpay have got some high-profile clients in the US. Urban Outfitters is one of them.
Yes.
If you walk through a mall in Australia, or if you walk along high street retail, I would suggest every third retailer, and it's not even an exaggerated claim, would have an Afterpay sticker in their front window. So they had that that beautiful situation for them as a brand where the people that are buying their brand from them effectively, or that are using their brand, are also marketing it for them. It's quite amazing. So you see Afterpay
it's like a Yelp or a TripAdvisor
really is.
sticker on your door.
The old days of Foursquare stickers, all of those things that people were using, going, I don't really want to pollute my front window, but it's being asked for. So you're getting physical retailers in Australia that are saying you can use Afterpay in store at the counter and also use it online. And it's gone from, to use maybe an analogy of, when the iPhone came out in 2007, smartphones went from, what's this thing you're touching your screen for? Then 2 years later, everyone had a version of a smartphone. Buy now, pay later was just something that was of my parents' generation, where we talked about lay-buying things in stores, and every time you'd go into that store, you got to the lay-buy counter at the back of the store and, put an extra $10 or $20 in. And it was almost like a Christmas or a birthday buying plan for things you wanted to get that might sell out or might be on special and you wanted to grab that price, where what Afterpay seemed to have done better than anyone else, and they're really exploding in the UK. They've had some challenges around their name of their brand over there, so they've got a different name in the UK. They trade under OnePay, and Latitude is a competitor of theirs in Australia. But we're seeing buy now, pay later become the default way of buying for particularly millennials as well as Gen X. But it's definitely been a millennial, and we're probably seeing the top end of Gen Z driving it as well. It's come under a lot of criticism in the media, going, it is encouraging people for overconsumption. It's encouraging people that go into further debt, that maybe can't control their buying impulses. So there have been ZipPay, in their documentation, effectively go, we are a credit card, where Afterpay are going, no, we are this accompanying product. But I think in the next year or so, particularly in Australia and maybe in other territories, you're going to see some more legislation around it, because for someone that lacks discipline, it is a really easy way to get into debt. And like a lot of these products, there's no real charge if you pay back your 4 monthly installments on time. If you miss any of those, then you end up getting hit with the fees. And obviously the fees is where their business model is driven. So bringing all the back to the marketplaces and Amazon, Amazon, as you mentioned, picked a kind of a third tier player to jump in. Now, eBay in Australia, which is the dominant marketplace, as we keep saying, they've announced a partnership with Afterpay, but it won't kick in until 2020. And which means for something that would seem relatively simple to turn on to eBay, you would think they would scramble it out before Christmas, but that's not the case. And they haven't had a launch month in 2020. So it does look like one of those reactionary press releases. They're going, yes, we're going to offer that, but we're not going to offer it anytime soon. So there's a bunch of oddities around the marketplaces here that are probably different to what you're seeing. And the buy now, pay later phenomenon, I think that's something you're going to see in the US in a much bigger way in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I did just a quick search on Amazon, because I can't recall seeing it before on the .com site, and there is no buy now, pay later option on there. So it is interesting to see them roll out these different payment options that are more popular in other markets. But
which I think if Amazon had the dominance that it has in Australia, that it has in the US, I don't think
they would have had to
be needed.
Right.
But the idea of ordering and the Prime phenomenon of it being part of a lot of people's weekly spend and shopping experience just doesn't seem to exist here anywhere near the same scale.
So a few takeaways for our listeners who are primarily not operating in the Australian market very closely. One, if you're going to be expanding to Australia, you want to look at eBay as your first port of call, even though I'm still holding out hope that Amazon really picks up their pace in Australia. I really want to see it. And actually the reason why I first reached out to you last week is that I saw Amazon's opening a warehouse fulfillment center in Perth, which is my hometown. And I was so excited to hear that.
And to give your listeners a bit of background, Australia is, big as Texas, but it's only 25 million people, so it is a small market. Perth was often spoke about as being the most isolated big city in the world. It's a 5-hour plane flight from Melbourne to Perth, and it sits over there on the West Coast all by itself. So to use a bit of American context, if San Diego was the only city on the West Coast and the rest of us lived on the eastern seaboard, and there was a couple of little cities kind of dotting around New Mexico or something like that, that gives you an idea of where Perth is. So
that's a good analogy. And I've found San Diego very similar to Perth, actually, very laid back beach culture.
Well, I used to live in San Diego, and for a while there, my brother, as you know, lives in Perth. Yep. And so I was living in San Diego, went over and visited him, going, it is exactly the same city with different accents,
yes.
but big beach community, really, really similar. Yeah. But I think what we can draw from that is that Amazon are committed in Australia. They are opening more warehouses, so they're definitely playing a long-haul game here. Now, whether they are going to have anywhere near the dominance they're having in the US, it would seem a stretch at the moment for that to happen anytime soon. But they are definitely committed by opening more warehousing.
Yes, and that is a bright spot that they are continuing to invest in this market, even though Western Australia and Perth is a relatively small population. They're obviously committed to making fast delivery available nationwide. So still holding out hope for Australia. But if you are looking to expand to Australia sooner rather than later, eBay is actually a better bet. And then also in terms of another market dynamic, buy now, pay later payment systems are very much expected in Australia, more so than they are in the US right now. So if you're operating a local e-commerce site, you want to think about adding Afterpay or ZipPay or one of those solutions onto your own native e-com site. Anything else, Scott, from your side? Tips, recommendations, things to leave us with today?
There's an interesting, as more of an aside, I'd suggest than a tips. There's a retailer in Australia called Kogan. Now, Kogan effectively made their name selling non-branded TVs that came out of the same Panasonic or Sony factories in China a decade or longer ago. Kogan gives you an idea of kind of what happens in a small market like Australia. They started selling off main brand TVs. They used Apple as a real loss leader to sell Apple products on their site. Kogan is now becoming almost a digital version of the old school department stores like a Sears. So Kogan has now expanded into selling third-party power deals. You can buy credit cards through them, where they're the marketing arm that sits across a bank's credit card. They're also they actually physically sell mobile phone plans. They've got superannuation, which to your American listeners is a version of 401k. And so Australia is a different market because it's so small. Some of the brands that have big audience out here start really expanding into other verticals in ways you probably wouldn't see in a bigger country. You continue doing what you did well in the category you're in. But I think Kogan is an interesting one to watch because they've been really aggressive in being one of the early marketplaces. And Kogan learnt from Amazon really early on. They were also Amazon-esque in terms of they were selling their own products, but they were also offering a marketplace. So similarly, there's a bit of that similar Amazon competition. But they offer all of these other services that literally is a modern-day version of, say, a Sears-type department store for what families now need. And they are really capitalizing and finding more things to sell to that audience they have.
I recall Kogan as a purely an electronics retailer, and so now you're saying that they've expanded into just department store, everything store territory.
They really have. I mean, the Amazon book, The Everything Store, Kogan is doing that. I mean, they had a launch a couple of months ago where they are now sending leads to car yards or car lots. So they're providing a way to sell new cars and I think even secondhand cars. So they're using their site as a lead generator where they're taking a clip of the ticket all the way through. And so they're things that we just haven't seen in traditional e-commerce retail. It's not really department stores. It's not really a marketplace. They've become this kind of hybrid category of their own and doing that by just expanding into other categories.
Gotcha. Well, that's also a bigger trend of people are becoming more comfortable with e-commerce as higher penetration in Australia, because it was a pretty traditional retail environment up until a few years ago. People would go to the store much more than they would in the States, even just a few years ago. Well, thank you for that, Scott. And where can people find you if they want to follow more of your work?
Twitter is probably the best place to find me. So I'm at Scott Kilmartin, 2 T's and Kilmartin with 1 L. I also run an event series in Australia called Online Offline. So that's onlineoffline.co, where we interview the best brands going around in the country, from e-commerce to traditional retail to packaging and branding and customer acquisition, a whole bunch of those categories. That's a live series that we run out of Melbourne, as well as video and put that on YouTube as well. So yeah, at Scott Kilmartin on Twitter and onlineoffline.co.
Great. Well, thanks again, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Kiri, lovely to talk to you. Bye-bye.